I often get asked the question of why I transitioned from being a pastor to becoming a marriage and family therapist. And I think for me, a lot of the reason that I became a marriage and family therapist after having been a pastor for almost 10 years is because of how I understand the role of the therapist to be different than the role of the pastor. I think that both are really, really important and both serve different functions, both within the community at large as well as within the Christian church itself. I think that the role of a pastor, as I've really come to understand it, has a lot to do with being the shepherd of the people to move people through. That we come into a difficult moment. It's the pastor who guides us through difficult moments. It's the pastor who helps us navigate through challenges in community and moments. I remember being at a funeral for a community leader last year and watching the pastor of the community really shepherd the grieving community through that moment. And I think the capacity and the skill set to help people navigate through things is vital and is critical, but is also one of the things that is different than what the role of the therapist is. That as I have found, my understanding of what a therapist does is really what I do is I hold space. That the goal is not necessarily to move through that space quickly, although I often find that eventually we do get through space, but my task isn't to actually move people through, but almost to slow down in the middle of a space and to sit in that space. I think sometimes, whether it's in hard conversations, sometimes it's in the middle of grief, sometimes we just get stuck, and being pushed through can often complicate moments, can often increase anxiety, can create disconnection. And what I do as a therapist is I come into moments that are stuck, into moments that can be difficult, and I hold that space. That we sit in there, we explore together why it's difficult, we examine why we got there, how we got there, where we want to go, what we want to do with it. But the goal is really to hold that space. And this is one of the things that I think that the voice of a therapist can be an incredible asset to churches as a whole. I love opportunities that I have to work in collaboration with pastors. I think that independently, my voice as a therapist only serves one function. It only engages in one way. And my pastor friends are apt to remind me that there are many moments where actually stopping and holding that space isn't the right thing. I think they're absolutely right that there are many moments that we have to engage and move through. And I tell them at the same time, I think that there are some moments that actually we kind of need to slow down in. I think that culturally right now we're actually in one of these seasons as a culture where actually were we to be able to slow down in conversations around racism, conversations around injustice, conversations around politics, conversations on family and around disconnection, that actually there's so much nuance to each of these conversations that being able to slow down, being able to settle into the conversation, to unpack it a little bit, to pull it apart, I actually think is really critical right now in this season. This is one of the things that I love doing as a therapist, of being able to come into moments, come into conversations, come into situations, and slow down, not because we're going to stay stuck, not because we're not going to get through, but there's so much about connection that happens when we slow down. I think that one of the places where conversations move from a place of collaboration and creativity to a place of conflict is when we aren't able to slow down enough in them. That there's something about knowing that we have time, about having enough time and space, about making sure that all of our voices can be heard. That takes slowing down, that takes time. But there's something about having that space and time in that pace that allows a sense of safety in the midst of that conversation to grow. And when we have an element of safety in the conversation, we're actually able to work through so many things that when we're rushed, when we're have an agenda that we need to get through, get somewhere, we lose the opportunity to sit and lean in and find the safety that allows connection to really be grown. So this is why I deeply am committed to working collaboratively with pastors. I think that their voices in our community are important. And I think the voice of a therapist in the church is also equally as important for these particular moments. And whether these are moments where church staffs get stuck and we're trying to model relationship, right? A pastoral staff, and there's so much conflict that arises in different opinions and different personalities, and trying to navigate through those. That sometimes I think there is a valuable opportunity to slow down and even to invite a therapeutic voice into those moments to say, how do we sit in this in a sense of safety that allows us not just to get to the other side, but establish connection so that when we get to the other side, we have this foundation of collaboration, this foundation of connection, the foundation where we know and are deeply known by one another that allows us to build as we move forward. So this is just one of the areas I think that as a therapist that I get really excited about. The ability, not just the ability, but the opportunity to lean into some of these conversations in a way that brings this voice is very much one of the reasons that I became a therapist to begin with. And I hope as I continue to move forward for more opportunities to work with pastors, to watch the vitalization of the community really grow. I want to see Christian churches flourish. I think that our voice to our community is important. And sometimes we need to slow down internally and establish moments of safety that then allow us to re-engage the process of seeing the kingdom of God expanded throughout the world. So whether you are a pastor who may need a therapeutic voice in your community, but also if you're a therapist who is kind of trying to think through what your voice in the Christian church can be, I think that the collaboration between pastors and therapists is really critical.